Welcome to Inside Games, the only gaming news channel brave enough to face the Dream Scourge.
That's right.
It's such a cool name.
That's why I just assumed it was just mushrooms all over my face. That's basically just what happens to me.
Yeah, we're dealing with corruption again in Avowed, Bruce, one of your favorite video game things.
Every video game has it.
Yeah. It's a fun trope, but my initial impressions are this is kind of a back to basics sort of open world core 3D action RPG. I think it has a lot of old school Bethesda feel, and I said that a lot about Stalker 2, which also just came out, but I think it will maybe scratch a particular itch that has gone unscratched, especially by some newer kind of games in that vein. I don't know, Bruce, what was your initial takeaway?
Yeah, I agree entirely, and I was really curious to see if you actually liked it, because it's funny, because I played about 90 minutes, 2 hours of it, and I've enjoyed it the time that I had, but it feels very wonky is even the wrong word. It just feels like it, like you said, it feels very classic, and in good ways if you like that, but it's bad if you don't. So it's not very polished. I will say, like, when you walk up and do dialogue with people, like, the lip flap doesn't really match sometimes, and like they never do facial expressions. It's just this straight-faced, like they talk at you, and this kind of stuff doesn't bother me. I think it's funny. It adds to sort of the innate comedy of this this sort of gameplay. But to some people, they don't like that. So I'm curious to see what the greater internet thinks.
Okay, yeah. I do wonder as well if people will bounce off of it quickly. Production value, yeah, you're right. It doesn't really do performance capture like a lot of other huge budget games. But like you said, there is sort of a 2000s era charm to that. And I think a lot of those charms are timeless, so I actually really liked it. But maybe that's because I have an attachment to those older kinds of games. So yeah, I am still going to be really curious how it lands in 2025. So let's start with the basics here. It has a very Elder Scrolls style intro, and yeah, I'm making allusions to Bethesda, but I think it's actually kind of targeting that vibe, especially if you played like Daggerfall. It starts with the king basically charging you with a quest and shipping you off to some godforsaken realm where it's like, hey, everything's messed up over there. I need you to figure out why. And that's pretty much it. Your boat wrecks along the way, you wash up on shore, and then after a little prologue tutorial thing, you start on the docks, just like Morrowind, and you're off on your adventure to go talk to some random weird people that have a variety of problems you gotta solve, all the while trying to track down this nebulous Dream Scourge problem, which is this kind of, in a very kind of Last of Us way, it's this fungal thing that's sort of infecting people and driving them mad. And that's the setup. You're essentially in this like kind of infected, twisted, tropical island. And there's a bunch of weirdos there that have a bunch of problems, and you can get a sword, and you can get a bow, and you can shoot fire out of your hands. And that's the game, it seems. So yeah, kind of old school, maybe a little too old school for some people's preferences, but I'm all about it. Yeah. What do you think, Bruce? How did you feel about the setup, the world, and just, I guess, we'll get into the gameplay in a minute here. But.
Yeah, it's just so traditional. So we can't show the prologue stuff, but Lawrence and I had to play it. And just like Skyrim, you literally wake up. And you wake up on the beach, obviously from a shipwreck or something, but it's just like Skyrim. You open your eyes, and then there's some dude over there who's like, "Hey, you! I know you!" And then he runs over to you, and he goes, he says, "We gotta go help out the blah blah blahs." And you're like, "Okay, here we go," which is fun. I mean, like, again, I'm not saying that this is bad. I don't know, man. I'm so curious to see what people think of Obsidian in general. If they still find the charm in what Obsidian is making, I do. I think their dialogue isn't necessarily as charming as it was in the past, but it is still fun and funny. There's some fun little, remarks you can do here and there when it comes to the actual talking with characters. But it does not have the modern polish. I would say that the game is very colorful and vibrant, but I don't necessarily think that it looks good. I'm not going to say that I'm like, whoa, it's, oh my gosh, it's mind-blowing, like the graphics, like, nah, it's fine. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. It's just more of just like, it's clear that that's what they wanted to make the game completely open world, and I am big about that. So yes, it's not necessarily the most polished experience. It's not like a Dragon Age, The Veiled Guard, or Star Wars Outlaws, but it is fully open world. You can go anywhere. And I did. I was like constantly looking for places to, like, you could see lots of special areas. I went behind every single waterfall because you could do those sorts of things, and I appreciate that very much from Obsidian.
Yeah, the look is interesting. I really liked the way it looked. I was kind of charmed by it because it is sort of a hazy, kind of dreamlike tropical environment. I was getting, again with the 2000s games, I was getting flashes to Metroid Prime, kind of navigating some of those environments, because it is this sort of like kind of hazy. I keep saying that because there is like this white haze kind of crouched over the whole game, at least in the areas that we played. But there's like waterfalls splashing through. There's overgrown vines kind of twisting. But in all of that are these pretty basic platforming like blocks that you jump on. I thought the platforming felt pretty good. Like the mantling is really smooth, so you're just gliding over the whole environment. But I kind of liked that. I liked just sort of the process of navigating the world and exploring it. I am really curious to see, like, I assume as the game goes on, the environments will get progressively corrupted, more twisted and weird. I think weirdness might be the appeal of this game. You mentioned the dialogue a little bit, and even comparing it to something like Dragon Age, I think exposes what this game does well or what it's trying to do, and that the dialogue is not quite as cringy, I guess is the word.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, it's just weird.
It's a little more rooted. Yeah, like you said, you have that kind of like doe-eyed helper that is there right away to be like, we gotta help the king. But the very next person you find is a smuggler who lies to you, and you can potentially like leave her locked up or help her get her boat. Either way, it's just part of like the thesis of the prologue. And I assume that because of that, you'll run into some other weirder characters that aren't just like doe-eyed and starry-eyed and telling you to help, or they're not just there to help you with your quest. Case in point, I think the earliest, most templated side quest in the world, when you go into the first city and land on Dream Shore, you run into somebody whose house is overrun by those dang lizards.
Oh yeah.
So she's like, you gotta go kill all the lizards. Help me out. It's, my cellar is full of rats. It's the 2000s kind of quest line. But when you go there, you see a bunch of weird shit. And when you come back, it turns out that the lady who asked you to do that is actually like soul paired with a lizard person. And she's like, what the fuck does that even mean? But I still feel like half a person. And you can tell her to try to explore this relationship with a little lizard man. So that's weird. And I think that's kind of what Avowed is trying to do in Microcosm, is be a very cozy, familiar experience if you played a lot of 2000s RPGs, but also maybe put in a dash of color and a streak of weirdness here and there.
Yes, Lawrence, you hit the nail on the head. There's so much charm to it. Obsidian's really good about adding charm to their dialogue and to their characters and to the people you meet, and just on a random side quest. So weirdly for me, then I start getting worried for them, is that going to have the broad appeal? Because I want this game to be something that a lot of people play, because I think it is super wonky and weird and fun. And like you said, you're gliding over platforms and stuff. I don't know if you played in third person, but it looks ridiculous. Like,
oh, I didn't know you could play in third person.
Yeah. I switched between first and third person because I love playing these games in third person. And you look insane as you're platforming. Like you're like jumping these big Spider-Man jumps, and like you're mantling, and like it's amazing. And it's exactly what I want in a game like this. But I'm not sure if people are like really, they think that's funny. And they think it's fun enough to continue playing. So it's a very interesting mix of elements that I enjoy. And I think since it's on Game Pass, I'm pretty sure it's going to be on Game Pass, that a lot of people will hopefully try, very much like The Outer Worlds. And The Outer Worlds is a pretty apt comparison to Avowed. So I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the atmosphere, and I enjoyed the characters and the dialogue and all that stuff, but I still don't necessarily think it's going to wow you. I think there's going to be a charm to it that the more you play it, the more you think it's fun and funny. But I don't necessarily think you're going to enter into the world and be like, whoa! Like, it doesn't feel like that. And that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good caution. I want to compare it to older school Elder Scrolls, but what I don't want to compare it to is Elder Scrolls 6, whatever that's going to end up being. Because that has ridiculous expectations, which is a bit odd given where Elder Scrolls came from. This is really the DNA of Elder Scrolls, I think. And yeah, I think part of that is not expecting the stellar production values that, for some reason, people have started to associate with Bethesda games. I think some of that DNA is on purpose, though. You know, the kind of janky, weird, old school, way too ambitious for its britches kind of game. The way that I read that most explicitly is in the combat. This game has like Dark Messiah of Might and Magic combat. Again, very old reference, maybe a little too dated, but it's got some wacky ragdolls, and I'm into that. And that's on purpose. I can kind of see. So like, you use weapons, right? And if you land a killing shot on somebody, first of all, there's some awesome time ramping in the melee combat. Whenever you land a hit, everything slows down and then ramps back up. It's kind of similar to like Capcom does hit freeze a lot, Monster Hunter. Like whenever you land a hit, the game stops for a second so your eyeballs really process you landed a hit. Here, it's like a Zack Snyder-y slow-mo every time you land a shot. And when one of those hits like launches somebody ragdoll style, you get this really silly display of a lizard just getting vaulted. Yeah, twirling and twirling. They even lean into it. Like I got a charge ability that just like rockets dudes across the room. So it's like, that's the appeal, I think, of Oblivion and stuff like that. When a guard like trips on a rock and is just rolling down a hill over and over, and you're just sitting there laughing. I don't know if it's going to have exactly that kind of appeal, but to me, that's the complete package. You have a big open world to explore filled with bizarre weirdos, and then the AI and physics and game engine actually collide to make these spontaneous situations that are not necessarily explicitly within the scope of the game, but are still funny as hell. To me, that's the magic sauce. And yeah, the games that used to do that don't really do that anymore. So I'm hoping this can fill that void.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I want to say the most about combat, because combat, in my opinion, is the most fun part of this game, and the exploration. Combat and exploration sort of combine because you really can do anything anywhere, and I love that. And it feels like your choices really do matter too. I don't know that you could kill any NPC. I don't think we've gotten to that part of this game yet, but I know that there are lots of things that you can do. So. In terms of combat, you don't ever have to class into something, which is amazing. You can have a hammer in one hand and a grimoire in another, so you could do magic from one hand and melee from another. And again, if you want to go full magic, you could spec all your points into a wizard with a wand, or like that's what I did. But you can also then go full melee, but you can rotate. You have two loadouts that you can rotate between, and if you get bored of using magic all the time, like I did, I was like, oh, I'll just go back to the great hammer I have. And then I could just do two-hand, swinging two-hand and stuff like that. Now you're a little weaker, but it doesn't matter. Generally speaking, the game does a good job of balancing all of those different forms of combat so that you are having fun in almost every single encounter. Also, all those encounters are very clearly laid out. You like walk into a boss battle arena and it's like, okay, you're gonna fight a spider now. And that's okay. This is all fun. Some of the combat's not that easy either. Believe it or not, I kind of thought I'd just steamroll my way through this thing, but there were a couple times I was like, oh, this isn't that easy. And then you sort of have to start thinking around that. You have to be like, okay, well, I was using magic before and it wasn't really working. So should I use fire here? Should I use lightning? Should I use ice? Should I use, again, just straight melee with the stagger bar? You don't know. And it is really, really fun to figure out all those different permutations of what you're doing, because the combat is generally always fun. And I will say that this, in my opinion, this is where the game has its strengths the most, is in the combat and exploration. I just had fun plowing through random enemies. Like I would just walk from encounter to encounter. I wasn't even really on a quest. I would just go and kill things just to see what happened. Yeah,
and I think that's another way that this game is really kind of back to basics. It really harnesses on just the fun of running around, killing stuff, getting loot, leveling up, and getting a new ability that just makes you more of an unstoppable kill machine. In that way, it does kind of remind me of Starfield. Starfield's progression system was very open. You could just kind of do whatever and have all your skills sort of pile into the same character. Looks like you can do the same thing here. I like that magic and combat abilities, like it all is the same resource, which is essence, and you get that just by killing enemies. So it's a very arcadey sort of system that guides the combat and the character progression. But I think that's one way in which it's not overly complicated, like I think maybe a lot of older console RPGs used to be. So it's finding a really interesting and I think easy to understand middle ground between being like outrageously stat heavy, something like Baldur's Gate 3, and being much more like straightforward and easy to navigate, like some of the older like Champions of Norath, you know, the kind of action RPGs on PlayStation 2 that people remember really fondly. So it is kind of situated in the middle of all of that. And in that way, I think it does kind of pick the best aspects of a lot of the different games that it sort of has chunks of. You know, it's got pretty deep dialogue trees and pretty interestingly written dialogue compared to things like Dragon Age or Starfield that are much more, you know, palatable, uninteresting. It's got the really like tactile, silly, goofy, ragdoll-laden combat and melee stuff. I don't know that I've played a game that has a melee combat system quite like this. It's pretty fun though. It's fun to just smash stupid monsters. And then it has exploration, like you said, the big open world. I would look in the distance and be like, oh, there's a temple over there. I want to go see what's going on there. I could see just losing hours in a very Skyrim kind of way, just kind of wandering around, letting your eyes dictate where you go, and occasionally maybe getting stomped on by a cave troll and being like, okay, I can't go there yet. That's kind of it. And that's a little refreshing too. It's not trying to convince you that this is some new amazing world that you're going to spend the rest of your life in. It's some adventures, man. Go have fun. So I'm super, super into it. I liked the look of it because it did have a lot of more hand animation versus performance capture. And that makes the game look a little more 2000s, but I was into it. And I like the color and this, like, they have an interesting sort of color palette. The game too, it's very iridescent. It looks like a seashell. And that's because it is very coastal, but it's like that mixed with corruption. So that's got a cool look too. It's Paradise Corrupted, I guess. That's kind of where it is in my head. I am much more excited to play the full game after playing the preview. How do you feel, Bruce?
Yeah, I am too. I will say one thing I wanted to talk about was the lore in the game, because it's all Pillars of Eternity lore, which I know nothing about, and it is, boy, is it bogged down with that lore. Let me tell you, like every single dialogue is just this, like there's a location name and there's a character name and there's a god name and all this other garbage that you're just like I don't know any of this stuff. If you know Pillars of Eternity, you'll probably love it, but I don't know. I'm not sure how many people will be into that. One thing I will say the game has is they have a button that will tell you about the lore that you're hearing about, so you can read about it if you really care, which I appreciate. I appreciate that they try to give you a little x-ray into their dialogue so you can see what they're talking about. Now, me personally, you get the gist, right? So you like you said, it's like somebody's lying to you or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, well, it doesn't matter which god they named. They're lying to you. So that you kind of bog down the lore, but generally speaking, you still have fun. That might be a little bit of a knock on this game for me. And like I said to Lawrence before, I don't think the graphics are anything to write home about. I don't think the water's good. I don't think the atmosphere is it looks like fully rendered. It is very beautiful in the sense that it's really colorful and like you can go to those places and look around. So I appreciate that part of it. But I won't say that this looks like a Dragon Age, because there were really cool parts to Dragon Age with lots of like fun particle effects and cool combat, and like everything looks really shiny and, you know, like feels like hyper realistic. This doesn't feel that way. This feels like a video game, and if that's what you want, then you'll be into it. I was fine with it. I will happily enter into that universe. I just noticed that it didn't feel as up-resed as other new RPGs. Otherwise, I'm very excited to jump into this and just fool around. I'm so curious to see what other people think of this, because like I could bounce off of enemies and quests for hours in this game and level up skills and then just like literally just steamroll through a bunch of monsters, you know, hitting with the hammer and just watching them spin away. Like I'll do that for hours. It looks great. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's the first game in a while that, for me at least, and again in the preview, early times, it kind of checked all the boxes. The exploration's really fun, the combat's really fun, and the dialogue is interesting. You are right though, it is packed with lore references that don't mean a lot. But again, throwing back to 2000s RPGs, that was kind of normal for the time. They would just like blah, 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 hit you with loreable names left and right. But yeah, the active time lore, I mean, Final Fantasy 16 had that. And I am super grateful that this game has it too, because yeah, they'll highlight proper names and stuff in the dialogue, and then you can just tap one button and it'll give you a little blurb explaining everything. You don't have to care though. Much like 2000s RPGs, you can just say I don't give a shit until you get out of every dialogue option and go on your way. So yeah, it's a bit of a throwback game in a lot of ways, but I think the one thing that really does distinguish it is the fun combat. Because God, Morrowind, Oblivion didn't have the most fun combat. So I think people that are really nostalgic for those games, and I think there are a lot of them, will probably get a lot out of this. But yeah, you're right, Bruce. I don't know that this is necessarily targeting the broad audience, but I just reading the reactions to the content of games like Starfield and Dragon Age, I think there are a lot of people that are also not quite feeling those games that are so explicitly targeted to the mass audience. So yeah, if you were underwhelmed by Dragon Age, this is by no means like a Dragon Age Origins kind of game. That was Baldur's Gate 3. This is more like a much more polished Morrowind, I think is maybe how to look at it. There's other games. There's Dread Delusion was another very Morrowindy game. If you want something right now that'll maybe scratch that itch or give you an idea if Avowed is for you. But yeah, I'm super excited. I did not expect the game to be that fun to play. That's not really what I come to Obsidian for. So that was the pleasant surprise. It's like, yeah, I could smash monsters in the face with a hammer for at least 30 hours, at least.
Let me ask you this, Lawrence, because this is one thing that a lot of people have been asking about RPGs in general. Do you think your choices matter? Because I was really trying to figure out if my choices did matter or not. And we only played a couple hours. But it was like, they give you a lot of dialogue options, and a lot of your stats are in those dialogue options. So you have a high perception, you can say something. If you have a high might, you could say something. And it felt like the choice would matter, but I don't know. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, I mean, without testing, it's hard to say, right? I think a lot of the mattering will just come into the flow of dialogue. You get to say a thing, and you get a response that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Kind of like Cyberpunk, actually. Now in the prologue, like, you can choose to leave that lady in the jail and go get her boat, and maybe she'll show up later if you get her out, or maybe she'll show up later if you don't and try to attack you. Like, there's a lot of maybes, but that stuff like pays off way down the line. I mean, in the quest with the lizard lady, I could have told her to not try to pursue a soul understanding relationship with a lizard man. I don't know that has a lot of tactile feedback in the game itself, and I'd guess not. But that's the kind of writing where it's like, yeah, the writing is the payoff, and the writing is also kind of cheap. So you can be talking with a friend, and they're like, yeah, I told them to just fuck off and move somewhere else. Well, I told them to try to make a relationship out of it. Maybe later you'll run into that NPC and get one line of dialogue paying it off. But no, I don't think expecting player choice to matter is ever necessarily a good thing to look forward to in a game. Because it's just not there's weird game development factors that mean it's prohibitively expensive to make that much content to actually pay off all those choices. So the player choice that does matter is in how you choose to play it. The weapons you choose to use, the dialogue options you choose, and the interactions that you have. So that, I think, yeah, again, throwing back to the mystique of 2000s games, they did lean into that. Like Fable, a lot of people were very infatuated with games that promised unlimited consequence for your choices. I don't know that this is a game like that. I think it's just packed with a lot of quests, hopefully interesting writing, and a lot of hammer smashing lizard dudes.
I agree. I was just curious. That's a question I always get. Avowed comes out on February 18th, 2025. It'll be on Game Pass day one. So if you have any doubts about it, fire up Game Pass. Give it a shot.
Yeah, there's a lot of good games on there, and there certainly will be by February. So you could do a lot worse than $10 for checking out Avowed for a month. Well, thank you for inviting us to the preview, Xbox. We didn't go anywhere this time, so nothing to disclose, aside from having a pretty good time with Avowed. So thanks a lot, and yeah, look forward to it. February 18th, 2025.